You are the chosen one, not because you asked for it, not because you were the most qualified, but because God saw something in you that others couldn't. Now, a divine storm is on the horizon, not to destroy you, but to shape you. This is not an ordinary storm. It will shake foundations, realign your path, and test your faith. When God identifies someone as chosen for a divine assignment, the preparation process rarely begins in public view. Instead, it often begins with a strategic separation, a withdrawal from the familiar, the comfortable, and sometimes even the supportive. This form of divine isolation is not a punishment, but a method of transformation. It is a recurring pattern seen throughout Scripture and spiritual history. Before Moses confronted Pharaoh, he spent 40 years in Midian. Before David sat on the throne, he was hidden in caves. Before Jesus began his public ministry, he was led into the wilderness. Each of these moments represents a consistent theme. God often prepares people in private for what he intends to manifest through them in public. Isolation is not just a physical experience, it is also emotional and spiritual. The chosen often feel misunderstood, unheard, or even rejected, not because they are wrong, but because they are carrying something others cannot discern. Family, friends, and peers may not see what God is doing internally, which creates a tension between divine calling and human connection. This tension is deliberate. It forces dependence on God rather than external validation. When no one else understands, when advice no longer applies, when affirmation dries up, that's when your ears become most sensitive to God's voice. Spiritual maturity is formed in this quiet, sometimes lonely place. This stage of divine separation is essential because it strips away the unnecessary. It exposes the inner noise we rely on for identity: approval, recognition, tradition, and routine. In isolation, God silences those voices so that only His remains. He dismantles the illusions of self, sufficiency. You begin to see that calling does not come with comfort, and purpose does not require a public audience. God teaches you to walk with Him when no one is watching. He teaches you obedience without applause. Furthermore, isolation is where revelation is entrusted. God often reveals critical insight about your assignment when you're alone, not because you're more holy in that moment, but because the absence of distraction makes you more receptive. God may instruct you to do something radical, countercultural, or beyond your current capability. At this stage, the instruction might feel too fragile to expose to the misunderstanding of others, even well-meaning ones. That's why God says, tell no one, not even your family. The early stages of revelation are sacred. Speaking prematurely can invite doubt, delay, or even destruction. People often react to what they don't understand by projecting fear or skepticism. To protect you and the vision, God wraps your calling in silence. This divine silence is not the absence of movement. It is the preservation of momentum. The instruction is not to hide forever, but to shield the seed of purpose until it is strong enough to face resistance. When a farmer plants a seed, it grows beneath the soil in darkness, hidden from view. If unearthed too early, it will die. In the same way, God buries the chosen in seasons of obscurity where they grow roots of faith, discipline, patience, and character. These roots ensure that when the time for exposure comes, the chosen one is grounded, not just gifted. Obedience in this stage is critical. The silence God commands is not a form of neglect. It's an act of strategic restraint. God is not keeping you in the dark. He is keeping you in the light of His timing. To share prematurely is to risk making something sacred into something sabotaged. Even Jesus told certain individuals, after healing them, tell no one. It was never about hiding the miracle, but about preserving the mission. Another important reason for divine isolation is clarity of identity. In the company of others, especially family and peers, we often conform to old versions of ourselves. These environments can tether us to former roles that no longer align with our divine assignment. By removing you from those surroundings, God creates space for your new identity to form without resistance. You begin to think differently, speak differently, and move with a clearer sense of purpose. You're not just becoming stronger. You're becoming someone entirely new. Ultimately, divine isolation is not the end. It is the threshold. It is the place where preparation meets protection. It is where God does his most precise work, carving away fear, pride, and false security. By the time you reemerge, you are not only ready to fulfill the assignment, but also spiritually equipped to carry it with integrity. Obedience in isolation creates resilience in public, so when God says, "Tell no one," especially those closest to you, it is not rejection, it is refinement. He is not hiding you, he is building you. There are moments in life when God intentionally instructs you to remain silent, not because you lack something to say, but because timing is as sacred as truth. In divine strategy, silence is not weakness, it is protection. This principle may seem counterintuitive in a culture that rewards constant sharing, visibility, and transparency. However, in the spiritual realm, revelation comes with responsibility, and premature exposure can lead to unnecessary warfare. When God says, "Tell no one," it is often because the word you carry is too weighty for common conversation and too divine for casual critique. Silence protects what God is building in you before it's strong enough to endure scrutiny. Like a fetus in the womb, revelation needs time, shelter, and separation to develop fully. Exposing it too soon to external voices, especially from those who love you but do not understand the spiritual dimension of your calling, can lead to confusion, discouragement, or even abandonment. The instinct to share is natural. We seek support, encouragement, and confirmation. But spiritual strategy is not based on emotional need, it's based on divine design. When God says to be quiet, it's not to isolate you emotionally. It's to isolate the vision so it remains unpolluted by fear, doubt, or worldly logic. Family and close friends may genuinely care for you, but that doesn't mean they are spiritually aligned with your current journey. In fact, the people closest to you often remember who you were, not who you're becoming. Their perspective is shaped by familiarity, not foresight. They may see your past failures, your weaknesses, or your limitations, and not the seed of purpose God has planted inside of you. When God says, "Tell no one," not even your family, he is not rejecting them. He is acknowledging that divine assignments often require undistracted faith. This is not secrecy driven by shame, but sacred privacy driven by wisdom. Silence also disrupts sabotage. The enemy cannot destroy what he cannot detect. The fewer people who know about your next move, the fewer open doors exist for demonic interruption. The spiritual realm operates by legal access. When you speak something aloud, especially into the wrong ears, you create a spiritual trail that can be followed, twisted, or exploited. Jesus himself often performed miracles and told the recipients to go and tell no one. This was not to suppress testimony, but to preserve purpose until the appointed time. Furthermore, silence cultivates inner strength and clarity. When you're not explaining yourself to everyone, you're forced to clarify your intentions directly with God. You stop performing for approval and start refining your obedience. In this way, silence doesn't just protect the vision, it purifies the vessel. You begin to realize that not everyone who is close to you is qualified to carry your calling. Some people may mean well, but their advice is rooted in human logic, fear of risk, or emotional ties to who you used to be. If you allow their voices to guide your steps, you risk settling for safety instead of fulfilling your assignment. Silence is not just for protection, it is also for preparation. God uses these quiet seasons to sharpen your discernment, stretch your patience, and test your faithfulness. Will you still obey if no one applauds? Will you still believe if no one agrees? Can you carry revelation without validation? These are questions God answers through silence. It is in the quiet that you learn to walk by faith, not by sight, or social proof. In practical terms, divine silence also teaches emotional discipline. Speaking prematurely can be a response to anxiety, insecurity, or the need for reassurance. But spiritual maturity teaches that not every thought requires an audience. There is a time to speak and a time to be silent, as Ecclesiastes 3:7 reminds us. And when God asks for silence, He is also inviting you to trust Him fully, without leaning on the opinions of others. Sometimes, silence protects your relationships. Sharing certain revelations with unprepared listeners can create offense, envy, or confusion. When people don't understand your calling, they may unintentionally become a source of resistance. What they see as concern can manifest as criticism. What they call wisdom may actually be rooted in fear. God's instruction to remain silent is not to divide you from others, but to shield them and you from unnecessary tension until the time is right. Ultimately, silence is a divine shield. It allows you to carry revelation with reverence, walk in obedience without distraction, and reach your appointed season without delay. It is not a sign that nothing is happening. It is the clearest evidence that God is at work, quietly, deeply, and intentionally. There are moments when your spirit begins to perceive truths your mind cannot fully explain. This internal awareness is not based on logic, data, or visible evidence. It's based on divine prompting. In such moments, God communicates in ways that bypass intellect and reach the heart directly. The Bible often refers to this as the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, Philippians 4:7. It is the peace that doesn't make sense on paper, but settles deeply in your soul. It confirms what your natural senses cannot yet validate. This kind of spiritual knowing is one of the clearest indicators that God is at work, even when everything around you appears uncertain. Spiritual discernment is not a product of emotional intuition or psychological analysis. It is the byproduct of intimacy with God. The more time you spend in God's presence, through prayer, meditation, fasting, and study, the more sensitive you become to His voice. This voice doesn't always come in audible words. Sometimes it's a still small whisper. Other times it's a divine impression, an unshakable inner conviction, or a burden that keeps you up at night. When God speaks to your spirit, it transcends your understanding. You might not be able to explain it clearly to others, but you know that something sacred is unfolding inside of you. This is especially important during seasons of divine instruction or transformation. God will often begin to shift your desires, adjust your perceptions, and nudge you toward actions that feel irrational to your mind, but right to your spirit. You may feel prompted to walk away from opportunities that seem beneficial, disconnect from relationships that are comfortable, or pursue a path that looks uncertain. While your natural mind tries to resist, your spirit will keep pulling you forward. That tension is not confusion. It's a call to trust. When God leads through your spirit, He's not asking you to ignore your mind, but to submit it to His higher wisdom. One of the challenges in this process is the lack of external confirmation. Often there are no signs, no prophetic words, no human encouragement to reinforce what your spirit already knows. You are simply walking by faith. This is when trust becomes real, when you act not because it makes sense, but because it brings peace. When you make decisions not because they are approved by others, but because they're affirmed by God's presence within you. This is the realm where spiritual maturity is tested and strengthened. The ability to obey without explanation, to move without applause, and to believe without evidence. These are signs of a deeply rooted relationship with God. There is also a reason God communicates spirit to spirit rather than mind to mind. Your mind is shaped by your past, your trauma, your culture, and your fears. Your spirit, however, is the part of you that is reborn in Christ, pure, aligned, and open to divine truth. When God speaks to your spirit, He bypasses all the filters that would otherwise cause you to question or delay. That's why you can feel at peace in the middle of a storm, or confident in a decision others don't support. Your inner witness is stronger than outer voices. You are anchored by something they cannot see. Another powerful aspect of this spiritual knowing is its ability to protect you. There will be moments when God does not give you a reason, but gives you a red flag or a green light in your spirit. It may be a check in your heart, a discomfort you can't shake, or a release that allows you to walk away from something that looks good. Trusting your spirit in these moments is crucial. It's not paranoia or fear, it's protection. God is guiding you from unseen dangers, false alignments, and deceptive opportunities. What your spirit knows often saves you from what your mind would have tolerated. Learning to follow your spirit over your understanding takes time and consistency. It requires humility because you must admit that God's wisdom is greater than your own reasoning. It requires discipline because you must resist the temptation to seek confirmation from others before you obey. And it requires courage because you are choosing to build your life on a voice only you can hear. But in doing so, you access a realm of peace, power, and direction that the world cannot offer. So when your spirit knows what your mind can't explain, you are not confused. You are being led. God is teaching you to live by discernment, not sight. This is how you walk in step with heaven while living on earth. When the right people begin to leave your life without warning, explanation, or closure, it is often a sign that God is realigning your circle for your next season. This experience can be confusing, painful, and even disorienting, especially when those relationships felt secure or long-standing. But in spiritual growth and divine preparation, separation is often a sign of elevation. God knows who belongs in your future and who does not. While you may still value, love, or depend on certain individuals, God sees the deeper dynamics, unseen motives, future incompatibilities, spiritual misalignments, and emotional weights that could hinder your purpose. God is not merely interested in your comfort, He is committed to your calling. This means that when certain people exit your life, it's not always a relational failure. It's a divine filter. People come into our lives for reasons, seasons, and sometimes lifetimes. Part of spiritual maturity is recognizing when a season has ended, even if the connection was once fruitful. God allows these quiet departures to reveal your dependency. Were you relying more on them than Him? Were they the source of your confidence, clarity, or identity? When they leave and you're still standing, you realize that your foundation was never them. It was always God. There is also a protective aspect to these exits. Sometimes the individuals who leave were not meant to witness your next level of development, not because they were evil, but because their presence would become a distraction or limitation. They might not understand your new priorities, your evolving boundaries, or your hunger for more of God. Their misunderstanding could turn into resistance, and resistance can turn into spiritual interference. God, in His mercy, will remove such individuals before they can sabotage what He is building in you. In many cases, these relationships are not obviously toxic. They may seem positive, supportive, or harmless. That's what makes their exit so confusing. But God sees beyond behavior. He sees alignment. A good person in the wrong season becomes a stumbling block. A supportive voice with a conflicting assignment becomes a source of internal tension. You begin to feel conflicted, pulled between the voice of God and the voice of someone who once helped you. That tug of war creates confusion, and confusion always clouds discernment. So instead of allowing the conflict to intensify, God simply removes them. No argument, no warning, just distance. And that distance is not a punishment. It's a preservation strategy. Another reason God removes certain people quietly is to test your emotional discipline. Will you chase after what He has released? Will you grieve over what God has already judged complete? When someone exits without reason, your first instinct may be to seek answers, closure, or reconciliation. But often, God withholds those answers to strengthen your trust. He wants you to be able to walk forward without knowing why, and to still believe that His plan is good. That kind of obedience is forged in surrender. You stop demanding explanations and start embracing transitions. God also uses relational exits to reveal your inner attachments. It's easy to say we trust God until He takes something, or someone, we weren't ready to lose. When that person leaves, our response often exposes our idols. Was our peace tied to their presence? Was our identity wrapped in their approval? Was our future imagined with them as a constant? When they leave, and the world doesn't fall apart, it becomes a clarifying moment. You see what was truly holding you together, and it was never them, it was God. There is also a divine cleansing that happens when the wrong voices are removed. Every person in your life has influence. Their words carry weight. If someone's words are rooted in fear, doubt, or complacency, their proximity to you becomes dangerous. Over time, their opinions can dilute your faith, mute your convictions, or stall your obedience. By removing these individuals, God sharpens your focus. You begin to hear Him more clearly. You begin to think independently. You begin to step out without waiting for validation. In this way, loss becomes clarity, and distance becomes direction. These exits are often quiet because God wants you to observe, not react. If He made the departures dramatic, you'd be distracted by the conflict. But in silence, you're forced to reflect. You begin to trace God's hand rather than blame people's actions. You realize that God is not just orchestrating events. He's curating your environment. He is pruning relationships so that your spiritual garden can flourish. And every time someone leaves, you grow lighter, clearer, and more aligned with where He's taking you. So when the right people leave without explanation, don't resist it. Don't chase what God is releasing. Recognize it as a sacred sign. God is protecting your purpose.